the freedom. I think if you ask me one word, I'd probably come up with, I love the freedom of it. It's the lack of rules. The sea roads, everything is interconnected, and something happens in the brain that rests the brain.
I'm on the bus to Inverness to meet a sea kayaker called Ed Ley-Wilson. The plan is to talk about his book, Kayaking the Sea Roads, but we're going to cover much more than that because Ed has run the Great Wall of China and across the Himalayas. He's picking me up from the bus stop. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Good
to see you again after, my God, how many years? Decade, at least? Our last briefest of meetings was on a shore as Liz and I kayaked in and Ed and his pal were kayaking out, so we do not know each other well. Once at his place, I asked him about that title, The Sea Roads.
And if you look at the West Coast, if you turn the map on its side especially, and you have the north on the right, and you have Ireland on the left, and then you think about the way that people moved around the landscape back in the day before the infernal combustion engine and roads and cars and all the rest of them, people came and went by sea. And if you read the early travellers, the Martin and the like, Boswell and Johnson, and many others.
They were quite rude. They were quite rude,
weren't they? Yeah, they were of their time, maybe. But they were quite rude. But the Highlands was a different place, and it was far away from the supposed centres. And I take issue with the idea of the Highlands being far away and away from the centre. I think we have to see ourselves as our own centre. But that aside, everybody came and went by sea. And when you kayak these places, you realise quite quickly, oh yeah, that's why Loch Inver is where it is. It'd be a really hard place to get to by land before roads and motorised vehicles. You'd have needed a horse and a cart and a good set of legs, And everything came and went by the sea, and the sea provided, fish, transport, social networks, the rest of it. And so I took the idea of the sea roads because we all understand what roads means. It's an interconnection transport piece, but in this case, it's by sea.
How did you start kayaking? Was it when you were in the Marines, or was it?
No, it was after that. So I came out of the Marines quite early, and then I was still just a boy, really. I was just a boy in man's clothing, and I came up and I worked with a guy called John Ridgway up in Ardmore, and John has become a good friend over the years. He's a good few years older than me. He's now 85. But he became more than a friend. He was always an inspiration back for it when I was a young man. And he ran adventure courses, and they were proper adventure courses back then.
Because he's done famous things. He's rowed across the Atlantic and all sorts of stuff, hasn't he?
Absolutely. So I knew a bit about that, but not really. But then when you come and you're in, I think I was 20, and what he did was he gave you responsibility. And he gave you responsibility for equipment. So we used to drive fishing boats and sailing boats, and he gave you responsibility for people. And sometimes those people were young. So sometimes the courses were maybe 20 young people between the age of 13 and 18. And sometimes they were older, in which case you had to step up because there would be adults coming and their expectations are much higher.
And you're about 20 at this time?
I'm about 20 at this time. And John was a really no-nonsense type of guy. He was an ex-para, but he had a set of principles by which he ran his adventure school. They were fantastic principles. More than that, he had this sense of adventure about him.
There were three principles, weren't they?
There were three
Positivity, self-reliance, and...
leaving people and things better than you find them.
That's a very good set of principles for anyone.
I haven't tripped those off for years, but they go deep, especially when you're 20, I think. And they are fantastic. And you can find more nuanced, principles if you go to, anywhere where organisations and good people are trying to do good things. You'll find more nuanced principles. But if you think about them, they pervade everything in your life if you so choose. It was positive thinking, self-reliance, and leaving people and things better than you find them. And we aspire to that, We don't always attain it, of course.
And that's where you got the kayaking bug.
So we used to take kayaks. And the thing about John's place, and I should mention Mary Christine too, his wife, she was a as much a part of the place as he is. He used the activities to support teamwork, leadership, personal development. The activities were the tool. They weren't the reason for being. And it sets that place apart. I think it still does in a way. His daughter runs it now. I think it still sets that place apart from many outdoor centres where they will focus on the activity. So you learn how to do a particular kayaking stroke or a type of roll or whatever. And that's the focus of the time spent. Whereas for John, yeah, you need to know enough to keep people safe, but actually it's the adventure, it's the travel, it's the journey, it's the teamwork, it's learning how to bond, it's learning how to deal with stress and change, becoming resilient, all of that. And the activities, as you know more than most, Simon, the outdoor activities, whether it's kayaking or walking or climbing, they're just fabulous learning places, aren't they?
Because all this comes in your book towards the end, because your journey's heading that way.
That's
so
right,
so
that's
logically it does end in there. And within that, towards the end, there's all this other good stuff where you casually mention, I ran the Great Wall of China and I ran the Himalayas. Now, before we really get into the kayaking, can we talk a little bit about those? Because they sounds like separate adventures in and of their own right. And you ended up writing books about those.
Well, yes, I did. I wrote about the Himalayan journey, actually. So I've been blessed by meeting good people who've inspired me, and John would be one of those. And I think what they say to you is, look, anything's possible. If you think a bit more broadly about life, don't pin yourself down. Life is relatively short, Fill it with things that you want to do as well as things that you have to do. Yeah, I took inspiration, and I was really keen on the mountain running. And when you live up in the Highlands, the running is fabulous. If you can get yourself fit to run up in the hills, off track, it's just a wonderful place to be. So I was in love with mountain running, and my pal Dave Whiteman and I set off to run the length of the Great Wall of China. It was all a bit necky permission-wise. We sort of had permission, but we sort of didn't.
When was this?
1988.
Right.
1988.
So crikey, there's no translations to help you in
There's
any of the sites.
There is no translations. And, when you get to Beijing, there's still an awful lot of bikes around and hardly any cars. There's a couple of high-rise buildings starting to be built. Deng Xiaoping is starting to open up China a wee bit to the wider business world. But it's pre-Tiananmen. Remember Tiananmen Square? That was in 1989, and we were there in 1988. Spoke to lots of students who wanted to try their Chinese out on us, Many were very frustrated. They don't have choices in China back then. And so we wanted to do this trip. And anyway, we sort of did, but we didn't really have permission. And we tried again when we got to Beijing to persuade them to let us do it without forking out $100,000, which is what they wanted. We didn't have any money. Yeah. So we just set off and did it anyway. And we had a rip-roaring adventure. We made 1,200 miles over about 42 days or something, I think, which is roundabout amount.
What were you carrying?
So we just carried what we needed. So we had a tiny little pack. If memory serves, the kit in the pack weighed about 10 or 15 pounds or something. Right. It was nothing.
Yeah, like a day pack.
Yeah, like a day pack.
But
very lightweight sleeping bag, one set of clothes. So in the nighttime, you wore all your clothes and the sleeping bag, and you didn't sleep much. But we were very young, and devil may care, and anything's possible when you're that age, isn't it?
Yeah.
And people would house us. So you'd run, and then you'd come to a place, sort of compounds and small villages. People are living in brick or mud-built buildings here, especially on the west of China. It's like a place apart, really. But and we always offered money. We managed to get some renminbi, some Chinese money, and we always offered money.
Of course, because there was two, wasn't there? There was the ones that the foreigners was meant to have.
So there's yuan.
Yeah,
which was that's
the
right.
one that they used.
So you could cash yuan on the street for renminbi, and so we had a stash of renminbi in our packs, and we'd always offered money. And do you know what? In China, nobody took the money. Nobody. I mean, the kindness of strangers was alive and well, and that's really stuck with me there. Can you imagine a couple of hairy, sweaty young men arriving on your doorstep here in Scotland and saying, look, we've got nowhere to sleep, can we come and sleep in your front room, please? How many people would say yes to that? Right. Not many, I think. So, but we were never turned away. We were sometimes attacked by dogs, but
that's
but we were never turned away.
Of course.
And it was wonderful. But then after a while, we started to get arrested by Chinese police, and you get arrested for being in areas that are closed to foreigners. Yeah, and the wall, of course, is a continuous thing, except it's not. It's broken in parts. But if you want a continuous journey, you have to move through
Closed areas.
These closed areas.
Yeah.
So we got arrested 6 times. We always got fined. They were always very polite but very firm. And after the 3rd time, and we got away with it because we were moving through different provinces.
Oh, okay.
So what was going on in one province was unknown.
They wouldn't
to the
talk
next.
to each other. No computerization to link them all up.
No computers. No.
Of course.
So it was rather fabulous, and we had a great adventure. Just one night of many. In particular, I can remember we were sleeping outside under the stars in this in the Muyuz Desert. It's called. It's between the Bend and the Yellow River, and these pillion motorcycles arrived. Men on pillion motorcycles, and they were very aggressive with us. We were lying on the ground, of course, and they were very aggressive, and they were signing that they wanted our papers and things, and they didn't look like police. They were. It was pretty clear they were. But we just refused. We said, no, we're not going to give you anything. You don't look like no ai gongang. You know, you're not police. Mm-hmm. So they got very cross, and then they drove off. It was a quiet night, pitch black, a few stars, in the middle of this quiet sort of desert ball. And we just upped and started running in the general direction. And then we had 12-hour adventure. We lost the track. We lost the wall, because the wall's just a mound in places, worn away by erosion. And we lost the wall, and we just went on a general direction using our compass. And 12 hours later, they followed our tracks over the sand, because they came with it was like a tracked vehicle, had wheels at the front and tracks on the back.
Yeah.
And you look behind you, and there's this wheeled vehicle coming over the sand.
Right.
And so we had adventures like that.
How are you navigating somewhere like that?
So
you presumably had a map of sorts, but they'd be closed as well.
The maps were, the maps. And remember, this is pre-mobile phone period, isn't it? And I've held on to this pre-mobile phone piece in my book, actually, in my journey recently, because I think there's great value in it. But back then, we had US Air Force maps, which we picked up from, it was either Stanford's or the RGS in London. And 25 miles was just a couple of inches. But what it did show is the wall.
Right.
And the wall is broken, especially in the west, in parts, because it erodes away. But where it exists, it's huge. And in the mountains, of course, it can be much smaller, but very difficult to traverse. But there was enough direction within that, and there's enough small towns mentioned that you can create a general direction. And once you're on the wall, once you're on it, your direction finding is easy. The main wall was a Ming wall, and there are offsets to the wall, because the Great Wall of China is actually the Great Walls of China. You know, there are several walls. But it's a fabulous adventure.
We could now talk about Ed Ley-Wilson's running the Himalayas, but we need to get on to sea kayaking. Not initially Scotland's west coast, but Patagonia in South America.
My abiding passion is all things anthropology, so I'm really interested in how people live, where they live, and that's guided me to travel to different parts of the world. And it's always as much an intellectual journey as it is a physical journey for me. I'm not really that interested in breaking records and timings and stuff. So I like to travel where people are trying to, where people live. And in Patagonia, it's iconic, isn't it? So I don't know where it came from originally. Probably Bruce Chatwin, back in the day. You remember? I can't remember what his
Patagonia.
Book, In Patagonia, that's
Yeah.
right. I love that investigative nature of travel. And that's a theme that I carry with me. Yeah, and Patagonia is Darwin and Magellan and, evolution and...
if anybody wants to read a brilliant book about Darwin, it's fiction. It's a narrative. It's a novel. This Thing of Darkness.
Aye.
And
I haven't read that.
Oh,
Aye.
it's just out of this world. It's written like a novel, but it's based on solid scientific fact. It's history.
This Thing of Darkness.
I think it's called that.
I'll look it up.
Something like that. I'm pretty sure it is. Anyway, sorry.
There's another great piece that will inspire, which is the Uttermost Part of the Earth by Thomas Bridges, and he was there. I'm dodging it with my dates now, but it would be 1800s, I think.
Right.
Anyway, him and his father, they essentially built the first buildings that became Ushuaia down in the south. And they worked with, they were sheep farming, right? So there's some unpleasant history in there around that in Patagonia. But Thomas Bridges, who was the son, was basically spent most of his life there. So he writes about the Indian people and working with the Indian people down in this part of Patagonia. And they are equal to him. You know, they are working for the family, but he doesn't talk about them as if they are somehow subhuman. And a lot of other writers, especially of Patagonia, write about the Indian people as somehow subhuman, or even non-human in some cases, very unusual people, Stone Age technologies. And I loved Thomas Bridges' enlightened view because he was face to face with these people every day as part of his work in life. So when Robert and I decided, it's my pal Robert Murray, he and I decided middle-age crises in our early 40s. Are we going to work for the rest of our days, or are we going to take a wee bit of time out and go and do something interesting?
I've lost count of my number of midlife crises.
I think I'm still in one too. Yeah. But you know, let's all have a permanent midlife crisis.
Yeah, absolutely fine. So what did you set out to do?
So we set out to kayak in. We had a general idea that we would do an A to B from the north at sort of Puerto Natales way, and then end up somewhere around Ushuaia. We got there. There's a lot of juggling to do with finding boats and all the rest of it. So that aside, we got on the water. Permission is required as well.
Oh yeah, Chilean Navy are very hot, aren't they?
But they were fantastic. I mean, we bombarded them with information. You know, we had safety plans, which were kind of a bit made up, to be fair, because we weren't on the ground then. But we had safety plans galore. We knew what we would do if we were going to be separated. If Robert went round this side of the island and I was forced around the other by the tide, we had a plan on paper as to what we would do and how we would communicate. Mobile phones don't work there, and we didn't want a support boat because the Chileans first said, "Oh yeah, you can come, but you need a support boat." No, that's going to destroy it for us. I'd rather not go. So we wanted to be entirely independent, self-reliant. But
not many people. And you're talking about wanting to go and your engagement with people. Now, I wouldn't have thought there was that populated an area.
No, so past people. The draw there, the anthropology there.
Anthropology, of course. Yes, I'm with you.
Was the Alakaloof and the Yamana people. So they used to live as seagoing tribal peoples in all these canals, they call them canales, in the channels in Patagonia. And when you get there, it's really raw. I mean, it's a really raw place. The ground is Nothofagus beech forest, which is sort of evergreen rainforest, cold, although it has hummingbirds, unbelievably, as well. Very, very prickly and extremely wet. And these people survived there for 10,000 years, depending on your archaeology. 10,000 years. People built beech bark canoes, which are big, heavy things. And they scavenged, they fished, they took shellfish, and they would have set traps for birds and the like as well. And they lived there for 10,000 years with hardly any clothes. You know, and these things are a wonder to me. And that culture is gone, but there are a few photos, amazing photos from the early stages of photography of these people living in and moving around this place in these canoes. And hardy as hell. And I mean, the canoe would be a family canoe, let's say, and they would come ashore. The men and the other male members would go ashore and they'd build a shelter, out of skins. So they build a shelter. The woman would paddle the canoe back out because it's far too heavy to take up on the shore. So they would paddle it back out to the kelp beds. There's lots of kelp beds.
Right.
Tie it onto the kelp bed. Swim ashore. By which time the men had got the fire going. So I'm not sure who's quite got the short straw there. But,
So you go to any wild swimming thing in Scotland and 90% of the people there are women. Women are really good at coping with cold water.
Yeah.
They're way better.
Yeah. So
how do you look back on that trip? Did you succeed in what you wanted to do?
This is the answer is yes and no. So yes, because we got there and we had an amazing journey. We took quite a few risks. We had some difficult seas. We got into the Magellan Strait. And so I've paddled the Magellan Strait,
Fantastic.
But it's big weather. It's extremely windy and it's extremely wet. And we managed to survive our piece for however long we were there, 3 or 4 weeks or something. And
that's you carrying all your food and looking after
everything,
yourself the whole
everything.
That's why I had that extra long boat. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So we had expedition boats they were New Zealand expedition boats. Brilliant. I got pretty sick of dry food. I tried to fish, but it was so windy. You'd go out on the water. Usually you're fishing at the end of the day. You go out on the water. You're pretty puffed from the day anyway, and you cast your line, and within 5 minutes you've been blown 100 meters, and you've got to haul it back up. So fishing didn't really work for us really well. So, but we had an amazing journey. We learned resilience. We learned to be hardy. I had a wonderful moment when I was fishing in a glacial stream, and we were miles and miles from anywhere here, totally self-reliant. And I was casting my line, and I was up to my knees in freezing cold water. And I looked to my right, and round the back of the trees, because I was in the middle of the river, I could see round up the bend. There was this vast blue snout of a glacier sticking out of the mountains. And you could hear the glaciers all cracking and moaning up above, in the cloud. And it was pouring with rain. And I realised I was entirely okay. I was absolutely fine. I was soaking wet. My upper body was dry. And I was fishing. I was in the wet, in the rain, up to my knees. And it was just a new normal.
It's very quiet in this part of Inverness, isn't it?
Yeah, we're lucky here.
Oh.
We only bought this house because the kayaks fitted in the garage.
Oh wow! You've got a Quest and this is the one I saw on the shore that time.
My other woman.
That I looked at and thought, is that a double? But actually, it's very long, isn't it?
And that's definitely enough kayak chat. Let's move to the journey that gave rise to Ed's book about Scotland's west coast.
Patagonia. I started to feel a bit mortal, actually. So I got to my late 50s, and I've got a few friends who've passed in their late 50s and very early 60s, one who's got a life-changing condition. And so, as that starts to happen, when you get to an age, you do look on and you think, oh, right, that's quite interesting. That could be me tomorrow. Am I doing everything I want to be doing, Am I contributing as I want to contribute? And so I contribute in lots of different ways, but this was a piece for me. And I thought, I've been living and working in the Highlands for 35 years. I've been involved with community buyouts, community trusts, wind farms, salmon farming, invasive species, dealing with invasive. So I've been involved with an awful lot of things in the Highlands. I brought up my child here. And I thought, but I've never really thought about this place. And I've never really thought about what I think about where it is just now. And I took inspiration, as I think you did years ago, from Alistair Dunnett in the 1930s. And I've had the Canoe Boys on my shelf since forever. And what I loved about that was it's not just the physical journey. He's going with an investigative mind, And I don't think he wrote the book, did he, for years, until after the trip.
Quite a long time after.
Yeah. So
well, they did have a war to contend with.
They did have that.
Yeah.
But so I thought, right, what I'd like to do is.
But to come back to the Canoe Boys, because yes, it is a thing of mine. What they were doing, they were sending stories back to the newspapers, and they were doing exactly as you say. They were using their tales of daring do as the hook. Yeah. But then they would be writing about the condition. And if you read some of the articles that come back, I was in the Mitchell Library for ages going back trying to find the articles.
Right.
When you go through them, they were very canny. They were doing, can they make it? Can they get around this corner?
Oh, really?
But then slipping in there the information that they wanted to impart about the Highland problem, as it was known at the time. Sorry.
And they did a good job with it, didn't they?
Fantastic.
I don't think I was aware of I don't think I've read any of this articles piece. I've read some of the recommendations pieces that came back afterwards. But
sorry. Anyway, your story. So inspired to a certain extent by that.
Yeah. So I do know the Highlands well.
You went out there, had big thoughts.
Well, not intentionally. I didn't intend to write the book.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do was just take time out to think, and I'm in love with the wild, so-called wild places, and I like being quiet. But I decided, in fact, my wife put some exercise books in my pack and a pencil because she knows I like to write, and I do like to write. So I actually wrote every day, and the weather was really coarse, so I had time in the tent to write. and something happened. It was about a week in, and something happened to my brain and my writing too, and this stuff started to flow out. And and as you move through the Highlands, you move through this sea of ideas. I mean, you could have called it kayaking the sea of ideas, I suppose, because as you move through, you glance left and right. Yeah, you could see the pretty view. You could, and you could write about that, or you could write about what a hero you are to go around this headland in this weather. That's not me at all. Or you can write about some of the issues that exist for the people that live here. And I've been engaged with communities for a lot of time, from Shetland down to Argyll and out to the Outer Hebrides, especially through farming industries. And so I'm not
unaware. Is that what you do with your job when you've been engaged?
That's what I've been doing, right. Yeah. So I'm not unaware of the challenges that occur, for folk living out on this so-called Wild West. And yet, there's also inspiring ideas coming out of this place too. Community land ownership would be one. And when my wife and I were living up in Assynt in 1990s, early 1990s, the Assynt Crofters bought the estate, and we were there. And I was at that first meeting in Stour Village Hall. A momentous change occurred when the Crofters decided to aggressively buy the estate.
Absolutely, 92, wasn't it?
92, yeah. And that changes you, that changes your politics. It's like, right, this is a different way of being, from feudalism to federalism, or whatever it is,
I think this is one of the things that really appealed to me in the book. And you wear your politics very lightly in here, and it's not preachy. It's absolutely not a polemic. You actually did capture a bit of Dunnett in this, I think. His inquiring spirit, an informed inquiring spirit. And I could have done more of it, actually, if I'm honest. But the fact is, it's more of that than it is an adventure book.
Good. That
because at first glance you think this is actually a bit dull, because it's like, this is what he did today, this is what he did the next day. It's written as a diary. But actually, when you start reading it, then the issues start sifting through, and I thought that was I enjoyed that bit of it.
Good.
I really did.
Well, that pleases me.
I'm going to have a little bit of a go at you, though. All right.
Oh yeah. Okay.
And that is fish farming.
Yeah.
Because you've been involved in fish farming here, and I'm hugely conflicted over this, over whether or not I should be eating salmon or not. I don't eat meat. I will eat meat if I know where it's come from. And my mate's Croft, fine, I'll have Boris, because I tickled him behind the ear. But I don't like the idea of factory farming. I don't like the way a lot of food is raised nowadays. That's just my personal choice. Respect anybody who wants something different. But I'm a bit worried about whether or not I should be eating salmon. It's great for the people who work on the farms. Can you make a case for fish farming salmon?
Well, I'm not dissimilar to you, actually, Simon. So it might appear, because I've worked within the industry, that I'm 100% in support of everything the industry does.
I didn't know if you were.
That's not the case, and you'll find if you move in and around the people within the industry, and people around the industry, including many NGOs are engaged. There is self-critique everywhere you look, and I think for me it's all about context, understanding context, and understanding direction of travel. So the industry exists. Yeah, it's a bit like wind farms. They exist. So you can choose to stand on the outside and shout and yell, and that can be really effective. And that's the same with salmon farming. There are people who sit on the outside of the industry who make a great deal of noise, and a lot of that noise is picked up by the national press because it's news. It's controversy, and it sells well, but it is rarely the full picture. Now, I'm of a view that if you want to change something, then I think you can engender greater change from within.
I've just got this conflict, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to be shopping after this, and I'm not sure whether I should put salmon in meat. Right?
Well, it depends. So if salmon farmers exist, right, and the fish is there on the table, different retail groups, and retailers have great power. Now, I used to work with one leading UK retailer intimately, so I was their ethics and sustainability person. Yeah.
Oh wow.
So my job was to move around the whole industry, and there's 200 farms in the industry. Our policy, and I'm not going to mention the names of the companies deliberately here, people can work that out for themselves, but my job was to move around the whole industry, all 200 farms, and engender change. because the ambition of this particular retailer was to engender change on the environmental front, the sustainability front, the animal welfare front, the human welfare front. And it's a very real piece for them. And they put money to it, which is why you spend more with them per kilo than you would anywhere else, right? So this is thought leadership here. And you either decide to engage with that or you don't. So when you move into that space, you start to meet people like, for instance, the RSPCA. So the RSPCA, like you, are conflicted slightly, aren't they? Because they're there for animal welfare. So if they see any environment where animals are not fully being looked after as they would prefer it, they've got a choice. They can either engage with that to create the change, or they can step on one side. And the RSPCA bravely, in my book, step in. They step in. Now they come under some criticism from some people, but they have a lot of respect from other people because they have created great change within the Scottish farming industry. You won't find an RSPCA in Norway or Chile. I mean, if you really want to see, yeah, all right.
Okay.
There are other parts of the world which is Wild West,
Mm.
right? Whereas Scotland's welfare piece is world leading, right? And it's world leading because people engage, and it's world leading because people who choose not to engage but make a lot of noise from the sides keep us on our toes, and that's good too. My view is that I know the context, and I know the direction of travel, and I know the intent. Yeah. So I would buy fish from certain retailers because I know that behind that there is a value system that is creating change, and I want to promote that change within the industry. My view is that
We continued that chat afterwards, and Ed recommended that if I want to buy farmed fish, look for the ASC label on the pack, Aquaculture Stewardship Council. For wild caught fish, look for the MSC label, Marine Stewardship Council.
Can you put into words the appeal of sea kayaking? What is it about sea kayaking? Is it the journey? Is it the way you do it? I struggle with this.
it's the freedom. I think if you ask me one word, I'd probably come up with, I love the freedom of it. It's the lack of rules. It's the sea roads, everything is interconnected. It's properly out there. It's a different medium entirely. Something happens. I can go away with, I do a lot of trips with pals, obviously. And we can go away for a long weekend, leave on Friday, come back on Sunday. And we've done nothing more than paddle around an island or two, but we've been on this different medium called the sea. And something happens in the brain that rests the brain.
There's an element of risk as well, though, isn't there?
There's definitely an element of risk, and when you take it on, it can be exciting, but it's not something I seek. I don't look at the weather forecast and think, it's really calm over here and it's really rough over here.
Yeah.
I'll just go to the rough
No,
place.
it's not. Yeah, it's not risk as in sort of wingsuiting or something crazy like that.
No.
But what I mean by that is, if it gets a bit rough, on a mountain you can always sit down.
Brilliant. That's a brilliant way of, or on a bike you can get off.
Get off.
Yeah, that's right.
You are very aware of being out of your element.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Yeah, I know you know this. So if you come to a headland and you know that round the headland the weather's going to be different, more extreme, then you poke your nose out, don't you? Mm. That's what we do. We poke our noses out and we sit in the weather for a bit. You're lumping up and down, and you're assessing it as to whether you're going to go on or whether you're going to go back, and
or whether you're going to wait because it may change.
It may change. But let's say there was a couple of places in my journey where there's quite a few places because the weather was so poor, where I had just that, where you move into this space out of the sheltered bay, and you move into this space and you're hoping to go from A to B, but for the next 6-10 kilometers it will be utterly exposed.
So how do you make that decision, especially when you're alone?
So I think you just go with my Kiwi friend Andrew says you've got to go with your gut. You've got to go with your gut, Ed. But it's not just the gut. What is the gut feel? The gut feel is experience. Yeah. So I think I probably draw on quite a few years' experience now. It's your desire for where you're going to go, And
have you got all the information? Did you hear the forecast this morning?
So that bit is interesting. Yeah. So I'm less inclined to that, and part of you asking me what draws me to go out. And the freedom of it, part of the freedom of it is not having all that information to hand. I love that. So when I go out, I stick my mobile phone on the bottom of my pack and I leave it there, and it's there for an emergency. Now in this trip, because the weather was so inclement, lots of wind, lots of wet, I did use my mobile phone for forecast, because the forecast was so changeable. So I would take the forecast, remember the battery only lasts so long, and I would write it down in my little waterproof notebook for the 3 or 4 days ahead, and then I'd stick my mobile phone away. And I love this lack of technology piece, which you can get with kayaking. You know, if you're sailing, there's rules, aren't there?
Yeah.
And, you know, you've got to give way, you've got to use lights, because otherwise you crash. And
also you're responsible for a whacking great big boat. This is something you can pick up and lift and put on the shore most places and put a tent up.
There's a wonderful freedom in that. And if you put the mobile phone away, then you are reliant on what you know about the environment through which you're traveling. So you learn to observe, and so I will watch the tide. I don't need to look at a tide table to know what the tide's doing. You can work it out, and it's a natural. I use the word natural, I suppose. I think it describes it okay. It's a more natural way of being in the world. You know, cast the technology to one side and look at the tide and work it out. Look at the moon. Exactly. You know if it's waxing or waning. You know if they're getting bigger or smaller, the tides. Watch the clouds. Learn the clouds. Learn what what's coming. Know what a front looks like.
Yeah.
Know your prevailing wind. Understand that if the wind has blown on a force 4 or 5 from the west for 2 days, then that coastline a day later is not going to be flat calm. There'll be residual movement in that water. It'll be bouncing back off the cliffs because of the aspect of the cliffs. So you get a feel for what lies ahead, you know. And you don't get any of that from a book, I don't think.
So how has sea kayaking changed in the time that you've been doing it? Especially here in Scotland.
I think it's more people are there.
Yeah. I mean, you see all the cars with the big boats on the roofs, just about every...
Has it been professionalised? I don't know. There's a lot of people making their living from sea kayaking now, and
either trips or coaching.
Yeah, and that's great, you know, because I think the landscape, the seascape's big enough. I mean, I find, there may be little places where lots of cars gather because those are the get-ins. But it's a bit like, you know, when you're climbing in the Lake District, for instance, where Dundee is, you don't see anybody on the hill, and you get to the top and everybody's there.
Or the bottom of Munro, that's where you see the cars. People disappear, don't they?
People disappear.
Yeah.
So I think it's still...
And you didn't see that many kayakers on your paddle, did you?
Do you know, I don't think... I can remember...
And this is what, summer? This
is June, July 2022.
So it's meant to be the best weather, June.
It was terrible weather.
Yeah,
so I don't know if you remember it, but there was the south of Scotland and all of England were basking in a heat wave. And then there was a line of lows that just came around. And I'm doing some slideshows at the moment. And I've got a slide with the isobars shown. There's just 4 sections shown throughout the June and July. And you can see it's just one low after another coming over the top. So we got the wind and we got the wet. And I don't begrudge that, because if it had been flat calm, I probably wouldn't have written the book, because I'd have been paddling everywhere all the time, you know, whereas...
And just think of all the midges you'd have had on shore.
Yeah, I mean, hardly any midges.
Yeah.
Lots of ticks.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, thousands of ticks. I'm amazed I haven't got Lyme's disease, but the... Not many midges because it was too wet. I thought I would be doing yoga outside on the cliff tops.
Did quite a bit of it by the sounds.
I did some.
Why is that important to you?
The yoga?
The yoga, yeah.
First of all, it keeps the body fit and supple for doing the paddling. But something else happens when you go into a yoga state. So yoga is not just physical. It's a mental piece as well. And I don't know who coined the term, but it's embodied cognition is what yoga is. So you're using your body to train, educate your mind to better understand how you are in the world and how you choose to be in the world and how you think about things. And I can go into a yoga session, especially outside, and I hardly notice the weather. Sometimes other people might be wearing things, you know, jackets and stuff, and I'll be wearing next to nothing. And something happens in the brain that allows you to do that and go into this other place. I just find it intensely refreshing. it's very easy to sound incredibly fluffy and.
Yeah, no, I'm sure it is, because I've never been there. I mean, I do it, but no, I'm doing it far more from the stretching point of view, and that's where I would come into it from. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that.
I do too. The feeling of strength to weight is what yoga is, isn't it? It's not lifting weights. It's strength to weight. It's being in charge of your own body.
Yeah.
So it must stave off injury. And when you're kayaking like this on your own, you've got all that weight to carry all the time.
Yes, within your boat. Yes.
And then there's up and down the shore.
Yeah.
And you're bending, you're twisting, you're on your knees.
Oh God, that does my back in. And every time I've hurt my back, it's been twisting and getting something out of my kayak or something like that. Oh yeah.
So that. I used to be like that, but I think the yoga has
really helped.
Definitely, it's helped, and you get incredibly fit. And so my pal Angus and I, we've done lots of paddling together, and we have a policy of never lifting a full boat anymore. When we were younger, we would always lift the full boat. Now we can't be asked for that, so we
just loads of IKEA bags, is it? Making
pretty well, yeah, and then lots of trips up and down the shore, and you get fit by doing that,
Absolutely.
And that's the other wonderful freedom of this journey, was. There's no sofas, there's no chairs to sit on.
Yes.
You're back to Alakaloof and Yamana in Patagonia, kneeling on the ground. And I think the body's meant to do that, isn't it? It's meant to move.
Let's just talk about the wildlife on your trip. There's a lovely little phrase in there, or it's more than a phrase, where you talk about you're aware of the millions of lives around you that maybe you can't see, but they are there, from the cockles, the mussels, the fish under the sea. If you want to get to the plankton level, there are
absolutely.
all that sort of stuff. Just because people think about wildlife and they think, "Oh, did you see a whale?"
That's right.
But there's so much going on, and in a way, you're in a very privileged position, because in a boat, in a kayak, certainly in a kayak, more so than in a bigger boat, you are seeing stuff that very, very few people get to see.
Do you think?
Yeah, I do, actually, because you're getting to places that people can't get to.
Yeah.
It's almost axiomatic that if you can get there, you're seeing stuff that they ain't seeing.
Yeah, maybe that's true. And you are close to the water, aren't you? I mean, you actually, if you think about it, your arse is underneath the water in a kayak.
Tell us about some of your encounters and stuff.
So yes, the kayaking is a wonderful way of connecting with wildlife, if you so choose to do. And if you're quiet, that's important, to be quiet. And if you go paddling with pals and you're chatting away, then you might not notice what's going on around you. Whereas if you're quiet, you keep an eye, then wonderful things can happen. And there's something about the kayak, I think, that maybe some of the larger animals don't see you as human, don't see you as much of a threat. I can't know this for sure, obviously, but otters come close. They come really close.
You don't have the sound of a motor. I think that's...
Maybe that's what it is. You're quiet. Obviously, if you creep up on an animal, and you should never do that knowingly, but you might come around a rock or something, and there's the otter, and it'll startle, and that's not great. You move away. But if you see the otter from afar, you can just quietly paddle, not towards it, but past it, and it generally won't be bothered. Dolphins. I mean, dolphins. So many dolphin encounters, and they come to you. This is the lovely thing, isn't it? When they play or they're doing something. And
you don't have a great bow wave. I mean, it's not.
No,
really,
that's right. No, nothing. They don't need to come and see you.
Yeah,
but they do.
It's curiosity. I just love that when the animals. You tell me about your dolphins, though.
So I had several times when dolphins come about you, and I mean really come about you. They're not just over there, far away, and you see a distant fin. But they're right in around you, and they're all around you, and they're jumping out of the water, landing on their sides. They're coming underneath you, and you can see the eyes.
And they're looking
on the sides. They're looking.
They
at
are studying you, and
And then the musculature of these animals. I mean, they're so perfectly adapted. And there's a wonder in these animals too. I mean, don't forget they used to be land animals. Mm-hmm. All sea mammals were once on the land. So there's lots of things to think about. Lots of wondrous things to think about, and their intelligence too. And I like to try and understand, what are they doing, and I try and explore that a little bit in the book. What are they actually doing at the moment? Is this just play? Is it a hunting technique? What are they doing when you see them acting? Are they
teaching
like this?
young or
I love all that. And then when you bed in and when you get time to really observe, and I'll do a Ronnie Corbett here and just veer off into Henry David Thoreau. I'm a real fan of Henry David Thoreau, who wrote all sorts of things. He was an American writer in the 1850s, I think. And he went and lived for a couple of years in Walden Walden Pond, it's called, and in Massachusetts. And he wrote about his experiences there. This American writer has the ability to observe, to really look and see and then think about what he's seeing and observe. And it's quite dense. A lot of people don't like it because it's quite sort of dense and hard to get to. I love it. I think it's just, I love his ability to settle and to observe and really think about what he's seeing and then describe that beautifully. So I aspire to that.
Well, it's like an artist, isn't it? The way an artist will look at something. You would look at something, but an artist will
really look, yeah.
Because they've got to paint it or draw it or what have you. And there's that difference between seeing and really looking.
Yeah, it's the photographer, which also has a look as
well. And did this give you time by the fact you were alone and you didn't really have a timetable?
No, it definitely gives you time.
I mean, when I paddled the West Coast, we were kind of like trying to write a book. So we needed to get to there, and I needed to take the pictures that are relevant to it and find out all the information I can, and then we want to crack on.
Yes.
You didn't have any of that sort of
No, didn't have any of that. No, I had a general idea that I wanted to move through as much of this landscape as I could, in as much a linear fashion as I could, and then I was going to finish up in Kayaking and Kinlochbervie way, where my love affair with the Highlands began, But yes, but you've got, and that's a wonderful thing to have. If any of your listeners get that time or can find that time, 2 months is like an eternity, because normally it's been a week, maximum of 2 weeks. I mean, my Patagonia venture was different, but that had its other pressures because you're abroad, I think. But here, in a place I set off from Guruk, and I've got 2 months ahead. And it took me a couple of days to realise, oh, hang on, Ed, you don't need to press on. Like, what are you chasing here? What are you chasing? You're missing something by chasing the destination. You've got 2 months. And that was a wonderful thing. That space in front of you.
You say you're doing a few slideshows at the moment. What are the questions people want to know about this?
Overwhelmingly so far, what people are really enjoying and want to talk about are the issues, not the kayaking. It's quite interesting. I had a couple of questions around, what did you eat? How
do you get the loo? Yeah.
Did you wash? Yeah. That sort of stuff. I did have some questions like that, of course. But actually, what people seem to be really enjoying is they love the journey and the descriptions of all of that. But the interest is what's going on as you cast your eyes right or left. Because a lot of my audiences know a bit about that. And some of my audiences are only know the Highlands as tourists, for instance. And, the tourists have a rosy gaze often because that's what the tourist brochure presents. But tourists have a great effect on the communities through which we move, not always a positive one. Second homes and holiday homes and all that's a real issue for communities up and down the coast. I've decided to be brave and not to be afraid to just push these issues out there. And I hope I haven't had too many opinions in the book.
Well, you've got to have some because you're not meeting that many people.
Yeah.
Because when Brian Wilson wrote, I talked to Brian Wilson ages ago about his Dances with Waves and Blazing Paddles.
Yes.
And he would actually, when he went around Ireland, he would find himself waiting in town a bit longer than needed to so he could have more interactions with people.
Right.
But he knew he was writing his follow-up book and he had to have those interactions so he gave him material to write. Now, you're not having those interactions here because right on the fringe there's not that many people right on the fringe, although you do write about some. So you've got to have some opinions of the issues.
Yeah, I think so. And your listeners will know by now that I've lived and worked here for 35 years. So it's not like I haven't spoken to people. It's what I do all the time. And I wasn't going to write a book. I didn't know I was going to write a book. When I came back, I took the scribblings and I noticed that there's hardly any crossings out. So something happened. I don't know what you're like. If I'm constructing on an email on a computer, I'll quite often stop and cross out because it's so easy to correct as you go. With this, I just had a pencil and a notebook, and it flowed, and there's hardly any crossings out. And I transcribed it onto a computer and I ran it by a couple of pals locally who I know are readers and cognizant of the issues around the Highlands, and said, look, if this is a load of nonsense, guys, just tell me and I'll put it away in a cupboard. And they said, no, this is quite zeitgeisty, Ed. There's some issues here that are current. And what they said was, you're drawing people in with the journey, but you're throwing open things for folk to think about. And so that as we go out into the world, we can go out a little more knowledgeable and a little more cognizant about our effect, you know. And I think the other piece that my readers have told me is the piece that I try and articulate towards the end, where if you're going to create change in the world, if you're going to stick your head up above the parapet, for instance, and advocate for change, or you're going to change your lifestyle in some way to counter some of the environmental issues we all are aware of, then that requires you to sacrifice something. And we need to convert this idea of sacrificing your second home or your third holiday abroad or your uncertified fish supper, for instance. We need to convert that from being a sacrifice into being an investment. And I think the way that we do that is not through just knowing stuff. It's through having some sort of feeling for it. It's an emotional reaction, a care, if you like. And I would even say in some parts of the world, North America, for instance, people are not afraid to revere. And that's something that doesn't, you can't buy that or understand it from reading. I think you have to experience it. And when you're outside in the wilds, exposed as I was at the sea and to the elements, you can't help but become very aware of just how small you are and how insignificant you are and how wonderful the world is and how all the animals around about you that you mentioned just now are still going about their business despite what we're doing. And it brings great joy, and it's hard to describe why it brings great joy, but it does, and I know I'm not alone in that. And from that joy, I think, springs some reverence and some care, because I personally don't want my Highland hills to be denuded of trees because of a land use piece that favours one animal above everything else. I don't want my Highland communities to become tourist centres alone, like a Greek island or a Benidorm. You know, I want these places to be living, breathing communities full of biodiversity. And the only way we're going to do that is if we start converting our alleged sacrifices into investments. And the only way we can do that is if we care enough. We've got all the science. I mean, I read the IPCC reports whenever they appear, and it's fabulous science. We know what we need to do. We know what the issues are if you believe in the science. Why wouldn't you? And yet, you know, we seem so slow to connect our politics with our environmental knowledge. And I think what will create the difference, therefore, as individuals and hopefully beyond as individuals, as communities as well, is care and desire and even a reverence. If you revere something enough, then you will seek to create change within it.
My grateful thanks to Ed Ley-Wilson. There's a link to Kayaking the Sea Roads in the podcast show notes, along with a link to buy me a coffee. It's just a small payment to say thank you to me for the effort I put into making these podcasts, and it goes towards paying the hosting fees, the music licensing, and trying to keep them all ad-free. You don't have to pay my bus fare because I've got a bus pass. I'm Simon Willis. Thank you for listening. Goodbye.